Okay, so good evening, everyone, for whatever time you're watching. My name is Steven. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Commandant Journal, Defense and Military History Journal at the University of Toronto. And today we are joined by Mr. Master Corporal retired Paul Franklin, who served with the Canadian Armed Forces for a decade in Kandahar during the Canadian mission there. Mr. Franklin was a medic in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he became a double amputee after an unfortunate combat incident that took place around 2006. And today we're going to be discussing his story, his transitioning out, and what he's been up to currently as a veteran and the work he's been doing for amputees. So without further ado, without this dragging on any longer, Mr. Paul Franklin, thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me. It's it's always good to tell the story and get it out there.
Yeah. So I first came across your story on Legion magazine, and for those who don't know, it's more like a military publication blog. So I mean, for American audiences who I know have a lot of them, it's kind of like Stars and Stripes, I suppose. And yeah, I just found it very fascinating, and I was fortunate enough to find you on Facebook. And I just really, to me, it's growing up in, I guess, this time where, people talk about mental health and resilience and going through a lot of, traumatic experiences. That to me is, very interesting to hear, especially given your background. So yeah, I guess my little origin story on how it could be.
Stories. I guess I'll start at the beginning, as we do. I joined in '98, and I was quite old at the time. I was almost 30, and I was looking at different jobs, and I was thinking a warden, maybe police, but the military really I liked the idea, and partly it was because of Rwanda and the work Dallaire did to try and end that conflict. And I thought, if one man can do something like that, then maybe even in my own little way, maybe one person could do something for me, like it would be honorable to do. And so I became a medic, and then really enjoyed it. And my first, I did a lot of training in the United States and across Canada. And I mainly work with 3 PPCLI, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, a renowned unit around the world, and one of the best in Canada. And as a medic, it was really, really cool to work with these guys and train with them and just kind of help them out as a medic. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And we trained all over the place, and eventually I went on my first tour in Kabul in 2004, 2005, and then my second tour was Kandahar, and that was 2005, 2006. So I was almost back-to-back tours, and it was a tough go, but it was worth it.
Right. Yeah. Actually, when you touched on when you joined at 29, that was one of the first questions I was going to ask. What did you do before, joining the military? And I guess you kind of answered the question there, the reason behind it. But I guess, like, what was your childhood like, and growing like to that point?
Yeah, I was born in Halifax, raised in Calgary. We got here when I was 3 or 4 years old, and I'm actually back in Calgary now as well. And just a great city, and it's really nice to kind of hang out here, and just so close to the mountains to get to do so many cool things. And that was one of the reasons why I like the outdoors so much. And one of the reasons I was thinking being a warden in a national park or something would be quite cool. But never really kind of pushed the agenda. And so I worked everything from a steel mill to retail. I did my degree in Mount Royal College, or now Mount Royal University, in business administration, and did all that, but I just couldn't find my niche. And then that's when I was in Vancouver, and I was kind of looking at, where do you go from here? And so I was living in Granville and 12th and trying to figure out life. And then I said, well, maybe I'll just try, and went down to the Seaforth Highlanders and really liked how the history of it and the stories they would tell, and it was immensely interesting. And unfortunately, my eyesight was bad, so I couldn't be a infanteer, which in the end is a good thing. And so I became a medic, and I never looked back.
Yeah, small world, Granville and 12. Used to hang out there a lot when I was a bit younger. Yeah, so I think with I know the medical technician role, I think it's a little bit different than how they structure in the state, from my own understanding. And I think so. Could you touch upon what was the training pipeline, the in the medical community as a non-com?
Yeah, in the United States, you tend to be in the medical profession, and then you're in the Army, but you're not in the Navy, Air Force, or any of the other stuff. In Canada, it's called a purple trade, and that means that we can go anywhere, be it air, water, ocean, land, you name it. And so the idea is that you have these cross-trained medics that can do quite a lot. I have a friend who was special forces, and then he got promoted and pushed into, of all things, submarine. And he's like, "Oh, I hate submarines," and so he got out of that and went back to special forces because it was easier. So,
Yeah.
but for me, it was a lot of fun like that, and I just kind of really attached to what we at the time we called long range patrol, and it was a neat idea. And I was fairly fit, and I used to do things like mountain mans and marathons and stuff, and so I was capable enough to do that, and it just worked out quite well. And my feet were all mangled from the marathons and stuff, so when I eventually did lose my feet, it wasn't as much as a big deal as people make it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great that you were able to combine, being outdoors and, I think a lot of people go in the medical community. Uh, it's a great feeling when you're able to really help out in that sense, taking care of people. So,
I mean, for the American crowd, so think of us as search and rescue technicians within the military, but also within each unit. So we've got all these cross trainings and you name it. So you would see a guy with his uniform, and he might be a parachutist. He also might be a pathfinder, another form of, or to the next level of being a para. And then you might also see submarine wings and dive wings or dive bells. Like, it's just crazy.
yeah.
And we're not a big one to give out medals, but we do give out badges if you earn it. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. So when you got to 3 PPCLI, like how many soldiers well-being like were you personally like?
I was a company medic, and so even as a corporal, master corporal, you're in charge of about 120 guys or so. And so we would go down to Fort Benning for a month, and so my job was to sort of run the medicine for the entire company, and everything from someone getting drunk to someone getting a spider bite or a snake bite or just being hurt on the job itself. And so it was quite a different way to look at how to do medicine, because they just tossed it onto me, and the responsibility was quite huge. But it was fun, like I just love that stuff, and I kind of did well in it. And I ended up getting 2 other medics, and then they would be underneath me, and we would go to the next level, and they would be in charge of a platoon or 2, and then of course I would be in charge of the company. And what was neat was that I had direct contact with the lieutenant colonels and the higher ranks, so that anytime there's the mission statements would come out, and we would do all that stuff. If there was a medical problem, they would directly ask you, which of course, I mean, it's like we could call an end to an exercise, or we could call an end to something if we saw some sort of safety or health hazard to it. And so they put a lot of responsibility onto you. And a lot of the medics really sort of absorbed that and loved it. So when we eventually did go to full in Kandahar, it was, we were quite comfortable dealing with some very complex trauma.
Yeah, pretty good lead up to my next question. It's always really fascinating to me the mindset people have before going on a deployment and going to war. So when so you joined right before 1998, correct?
Yeah, 98.
So that was so 3 years before 9/11.
Yeah, so we had no clue that this was coming, of course. And then but the funny thing is the Canadian military ran a test, and they were like, what would be the world's worst place to have a long-term conflict? And so they crunched the numbers, and they said, okay, the world's worst place that Canada could ever send a battalion of people was Kandahar, Afghanistan. And then, bam, 9/11 happens. And there we are in Kabul, and special forces are all over Afghanistan, working with the Americans and getting their respect as we give it back. And yeah, it was pretty amazing stuff. So, like, to be part of that, I'm always proud of.
Yeah. So, being in the 3PBCLI when 9/11 happened, and then going into 2004 when you knew that you were going to deploy, and of course before deployment you usually train for almost a year for it. What was it for you personally? What was that like mindset to prepare for a task of that undertaking, especially when it's like you were there for a year, correct? The tour was
No, the first tour was 3 months. The second one was 6 months. And Canada at the time generally only did 6-month tours. The Australians were doing 4-month tours, and the Brits were doing 7 months, I think. And of course, it's changed since then. But the idea is that you go in intensely for 6 months and then you get pulled out. Whereas we found that if you go in for a year, like the Americans are doing with National Guard and stuff, that these people just get complacent. And also they tend to start blaming the locals for a lot of things that aren't their problems. And so you end up with the us versus them mentality, which always is a bad thing, and it always turns out wrong. So that's one of the reasons they go with such short tours. And of course, special forces guys go in 1 month and maybe 2 at the most.
Yeah. So I guess going back to my original question, like what was it for you, like preparing like mentally to go into such a dangerous place when that this was the like statistically speaking the worst place to fight a war? And
and
I was too young at the time. I think probably when you were in Kandahar, I probably didn't even know how to speak Chinese very well, and God knows any English words by then. So I was too young to kind of really grasp what the aftermath of 9/11 was really like. So yeah, like how did that
Well, we at the time we were, as a medic, we were teaching just St. John's first aid kind of level stuff, and then there's our paramedic stuff that we would do on our own. But the level of training for the locals, as in the regular soldiers, was quite minimal. And so one of the great things that 9/11 did, if you can call it a great thing, is that it brought in a lot of institutional change within the Canadian military. We went from probably being one of the most ill-equipped and inefficient small militaries in the world, and within 3 years we became the most effective and one of the best equipped small militaries in the world. And that's all on the back of just the soldiers that had done the training. And it wasn't really a reflection of the training, because everybody just joined in and helped change the entire system. So we went after the friendly fire incident in 2001, which I think is either today or yesterday.
Yesterday, yes.
Yeah, yesterday. And so that's when, of course, the Americans dropped a 1,000-pound bomb on our guys. And for whatever reason, we got lucky and only 4 died, because it could have wiped out easily 60 or 70 of the guys. And what had happened is it just happened to hit on the backside of the hill where the other guys were mainly on this side of the hill. So it just killed a couple of dudes, wounded a bunch, but these guys down here were safe. And so that was the anniversary just yesterday. And from that, tactical medicine, or TCC, came out of it, which is a Navy SEAL first aid program that we adopted into the Canadian military. And for a while, it was called combat medicine, and then tactical medicine. And as a medic, we would instruct people and do it on our own. And sometimes we would do it without even the medical chain of command approving what we were teaching, because they considered some of this stuff to be so high advanced that we shouldn't be teaching it to these infanteers. And of course, we got greatly offended by that. So we did everything we could to teach it to as many people as possible, because we also knew that when we go into these places, it's not going to be the medic that's going to be the first guy on the scene. It's going to be your fellow soldier. And what he does in the first 2 or 3 seconds upon arrival at that scene will mean that guy either lives or dies. It's all in their hands. We can patch up the parts and pieces, but that first piece has to be done properly. And that was one of the things that we really brought into training. So, and of course, the infantry guys just loved it, because we gave them the responsibility to save their friends. And that's exactly what they've always wanted.
Right. So in 2000, so the first tour you were primarily in the capital city, right?
Yeah, we were. Canada was in Kabul, and they had a huge camp there called Camp Julian. And I worked just. They originally wanted me just to come in and do patrol medic stuff, and I got lucky, and I got to work with the embedded training team. And these guys were training the Afghan army, and so I ended up working as a medic, helping teach the Afghans. And we deployed with them for about a month outside, or just on the southern side of Kabul, near a dam. And if there's rockets being shot at the camp or at the hotel, we would go and try and find the original site. So left the place where the rockets would land to the locals and to the ISAF, International Stability Afghan Force, and the Afghan forces to deal with, and that we would go and search for the bad guys. And we did that with a Afghan company or a Kandak, which I guess would be a battalion it's called. And that was really cool because we got to live right in their camp, and I would teach the Afghans some first aid stuff and show them inside the medical bag and what I carry and what they carry. And of course, this is all before a lot of the insider attacks. So we were quite loose in their security, if you will. So, you know, my interpreter slept in the same tent I did. I walked around with a pistol on and stuff, but I never once feared for my life within the camp. I always thought they were there to help us. So,
Right.
Yeah, it is the first tour in Kabul was quite interesting.
Yeah, and that was right after, well, the main offensive that, you know, kind of took out the most conventional Taliban forces before they kind of fled towards like Helmand and Kandahar.
Yeah. And so this is 2004, and so just geopolitically, think that Bush and Cheney and everybody have ramped up Iraq. They think they've won in Iraq. 2004, you're dealing in the summer. All of a sudden, Fallujah happens, and then they realize that Iraq's not won, and they're going to be there for a while. So they end up, in many ways, they start pulling troops from Afghanistan to go to Iraq, and of course that destabilized Afghanistan. And had we had the right troops in the beginning, be it foreign, United States or the international, we could have ended this war 2006 easy. But unfortunately, that's not the way things work. And here we are today, is 2021, and finally the Americans are ending their war. So
yeah,
it works.
Yeah,
slowly.
I guess. Yeah, so it sounds like that first tour in Kabul, you were, you know, I guess out in the, you know, outside the wire quite a bit, and you were very close with the locals.
Yeah, but I'll just add one thing. Sergeant that I was with, he really wanted me. We had just got the Mercedes G-Wagon.
Yeah.
He was a photographer, so we would go around the city on training things, and so he would, you know, teach me how to drive in combat situations.
Yeah.
But the real truth is he wanted to go and take pictures of the locals and the scenery. And it was a great excuse to get the hell out of the camp and just be a single vehicle driving around Kabul by ourselves, two dudes, and that was it.
Really?
And so totally different security mindset. We were all still ready, but it was just a very, very low intensity conflict. And the locals didn't really want to kill us because they were still unsure if the Taliban would be back next week, put it that way. Like, the Taliban had largely disappeared, but in the vacuum, the Afghan government didn't come in. There was just nothing. And so the question was, what's going to happen? And of course, the Taliban returned from Pakistan, and then things got worse, and here we are today.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first tour was incredibly interesting, and I got to drive around and see things that you'd never expect on a first tour kind of experience.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's actually kind of crazy to me, because, you know, when you see Afghanistan on the news, and, you know, maybe because by the time I was mature enough to really understand what the whole war was about, it's all about checkpoints and security and barbed wire. Yeah. You have like green zone, like, I don't know. I mean, I know it's in Iraq, but, you know, you have like little walled off areas for, like, you know, high ranking foreign nationals. So that's just, yeah, that's really interesting that you were able to just
And it was neat. I mean, we would drive to places and he goes, "Oh, this is where Al Qaeda had their training camp." We'd go into the training camp, take pictures. And it was like the most bizarre thing. And the locals were like, "Hey, how's it going?" And like it was a very surreal scene. Looking back, I should have got more footage of that stuff because when the cameras weren't there at the time. But man, oh man, what? Look, we even saw the what's it called? When they play the game with horses and a dead goat, and you try and drag the goat across the line.
Game.
I can't think of the name. Anyways, we saw one of those, and that was really cool. And there was probably about 5,000 people surrounding it. There's dog fights, and I'm like, I want to go see that. He goes, the sergeant's like, yeah, I think that one would be too dangerous because you'd be like the only white guys there. So
that could be a great photo exhibition if.
Oh, it would have been National Geographic level stuff.
Sure. That just,
it was cool.
It was a lot of fun. Like honestly, that just.
Like one of the things we did was just before Adrian Clarkson's visit on Christmas or New Year's in 2004, and so they just searched some buildings just probably 200-300 meters outside the camp, and one of them is near the old museum, and there was a place that was originally a Pepsi factory. So we went in and there's just this huge pile of just black crap, and it's like, man, this doesn't smell right. It's very ammonia centric. And one of the locals, Afghan army soldiers, he picks up a handful, he puts it in another pile and throws a match in it. He goes, yeah, don't touch that. We're like, what the hell? And he goes, yeah, this is just an IED factory. And we're like, oh my God. And it was like right beside our camp, and it was like, okay, we got to clean this place up. So
they had an IED factory inside a former Pepsi factory.
Of course, yeah. They even found a picture of the CEO of Pepsi. So this had been this would be like 1971. Yeah. And it was a black and white picture of the King of Afghanistan and the CEO of Pepsi opening that factory. And obviously it came from like just the files in the back room kind of thing. It was freaky cool. And then of course unfortunately the commanding officer, the Kandak, he's like, I'll take that. I'm like, oh, that would have been a cool picture to have.
Yeah, that would have been such a cool thing to have. King of Afghanistan and Pepsi CEO back in the 70s.
Exactly. Like just everything that's just,
I wonder how much that would go for actually on that.
Oh, exactly. And especially with the backstory of where it came from. That's the cool part.
Yeah, that's sorry, it's just so mind-boggling that from the disconnect between what we see in the media and
Oh, yeah. I mean, Afghanistan in 71, 72, 79 was just a hippie-centric. There was no burqas really outside of the small towns. And it was generally a moderate Muslim country. And then, unfortunately, in 92, the Taliban came from Pakistan and decided to stir the pot. And here we are today.
Yeah, I actually think a lot of people do kind of forget that about the Middle East. Even same thing with Iraq and Iran, it wasn't always like this, and it's more so a recent phenomenon that they have become so radicalized, if that's the right word to say.
Oh, for sure. And but look at where we are today. The Taliban are kind of largely wiped off the map. We don't even know who the real leadership is because I remember a story. General Hillier, one of our celebrated generals in Canada, he said that the Taliban is an organization that's run by janitors. And someone said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, if you're in the top 10 or top 3, you're wiped out. And it's like weekly, they're killing these guys. Hey, congratulations, you're the 3rd in charge of the Taliban. And the guy'd be like, oh, I just want to clean toilets. And sure enough, a bomb would come, kill him. Next. And so now we have, I don't even know who the hell is in charge of the Taliban now. Because, I mean, there's no leadership, there's no control. They're just kind of a forgotten organization in a sense, much like ISIS is now.
Yeah,
they've turned themselves into this useless organization, and I think the only real radicalized group right now with control or with some sort of command structure is Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram in Nigeria, but I just don't see it anywhere else right now. I mean, there's remnants, but it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So compared to your first tour, where there was a lot of, I guess, cowboy style fun.
Oh yeah.
Your second tour in Kandahar, that was a lot different.
It was, but it was also a very typical Canadian tour. So we were the first guys into Kandahar after Kabul closed, and our job was to kind of set up the Canadian mission in Kandahar and just kind of see what's going on. So a lot of the cowboy stuff still went on because instead of just one person going, we would go in 3 vehicles, and you'd have 2 G-Wagon gun trucks. And then the middle vehicle would be a G-Wagon SUV, which I was driving, and that's where you put your VIP or your diplomat or anyone going to certain meetings. And the whole idea at the time was the 3D construct of defense, diplomacy, and development. And the idea was that we would instigate all 3 of those things by working with the locals. And so it was a very different concept than the Iraq War, where the Americans are just going in and hammering people and killing people, which, you know, has to be done. But on a larger scale, you also have to leave the country at some point. So you actually have to work with the locals, and you have to work with them to develop programs and services and you know, just to help them to the next level so that they can learn to help themselves. And so that was the point of the Kandahar mission. So we had 7 people in our little platoons, but we had a company medic within each of those sections, which was at the time unheard of because remember, I was used to dealing with about like 120, 100 people as a company medic, and now I'm stuck with only 7. But what made it interesting is we could run into a village and set up a small medical clinic. And if you have 2 or 3 other sections, you now have 3 company medics, and we could run medicine for an entire town for half a day and really push and get some of this medicine and some of the preventive medicine stuff out there to really help the locals. But we did it as these little tiny groups. So in many ways, it was very much a PPC-like cowboy operation. And that's what I prefer, and that's what Canada is known for. You let the officers kind of just step back and let us soldiers and corporals and master corporals do our job, and don't give me any hassle and step out of the way. And it works almost every time.
So you would say that you had you had a lot of autonomy doing what you were doing back in 2005.
Yeah, I mean, part of the mission statements for the patrols we would do every day. So you'd have these guys. So you have 7 sections, and then you'd rotate that at least one section was on patrol somewhere in the city of Kandahar and the area around it every single day. But we would never have you need to do this, you need to go here, you need to do this. So we would end up hooking up with meetings for our diplomats and stuff, and then we would do a patrol within that. And so we'd go into these neighborhoods that had never seen a white person for the life of them. And then there's the head of the Canadian diplomats, Glenberry, and he's talking to some basically community organizer in the middle of the north side or the north suburbs of Kandahar. And he's like, why are you talking to me? And he goes, we would just want to talk to everyone. But what we didn't know is by doing that, they thought we were everywhere. To them, it seemed like no matter what happened, you could expect a Canadian military patrol to just appear. And that, in a sense, calmed a lot of things down, to the point that in the summer after I blew up, so 2006, they went out and the Americans were saying there's not much happening here. The guys were doing patrols in these little tiny villages, one of them being Panjwai, and they started noticing a lot of Pakistani money, batteries with Pakistan writing on it, used for night vision, that kind of thing. And then they're like, the locals are saying there's a lot of people, young males, that are not from here. And that's when we realized that the Taliban had actually amassed about 2,000 to 3,000 people in the summer of 2006 in an attempt to take the city of Kandahar. And that's when Operation Medusa happened, and they contained them in the village of Panjwai and then crushed them. But it was that close that it was the potential to lose the city of Kandahar was there in the summer of 2006. So that was after my incident.
Right. So you were driving. I mean, in the Legion article, it says the accident happened when you were up the wheel, right? You were driving a vehicle. So were you close with the close protection elements that were there, or were you still with that?
Yeah, it's an American perspective. That's what you would call it as a close protection unit or a diplomatic protection unit. Yeah. But because we're Canadian, we don't have that. So we would have our RCMP guy or superintendent, RCMP superintendent, which is like a general. He'd be in one vehicle, and then I'd have the diplomat in the other one, and we'd go around and do these meetings for defense, diplomacy, and development. And so foreign affairs was with us and all that stuff. So we were really it was neat because we would go to these meetings and we'd provide the protection cell around it. We'd do the meetings and then scoot off. But then we'd kind of sometimes add a little patrol in between. And it really kind of, again, it screwed up the locals or the bad guys, because they would expect, you have a meeting and you go straight home to the base and don't stop. And even on the day that I blew up, we had our meeting and then we went right back to Kandahar airfield for coffee. And so we all got our lattes and coffees and we're all happy with our mochas. And then we drove back, and apparently the guy that was there was just inside the Kandahar. And so we were in 4 vehicles, 1 gun truck at the front, 1 in the back, 2 SUVs in the middle. Superintendent of RCMP was behind me in that vehicle, and the foreign affairs diplomat was in my vehicle. And as we passed this point, this guy pulled out and hit us, or was about to hit us, and Jeff, my co-driver, called car right. Mm-hmm. And so just at the right time, I swerved left. So instead of hitting us in the middle, killing us, Jeff warning us was able to make it so that the guy hit the rear of the vehicle, or the axle, killed our diplomat instantly. Jeff had severe brain injury, Will broken arms, broken legs, and then I had my left leg cut off and burns for hands and face and stuff. So yeah, it was all in about that quick of a time too.
So that was, sorry, you just.
Segued right into it.
You just described like that incident super quickly, and I was kind of surprised by that. So
it's you could describe it in little bits and pieces, but I think sometimes it's more effective to describe it in the timeline it can happen.
Yeah.
So from just driving into the city, the guy hits us, and then boom, within 10-15 seconds, I'm lying on the side of the road, legs cut off. Our diplomat's dead, the bad guy's dead, 2 civilians are dead, and we're in this aftermath of this giant explosion. So yeah, it's shocking how fast that stuff can happen. And if you think about it, Jeff was the engineer and I was the medic, and because again in Canada we cross-trained all these different things, so I was also the driver. It was the worst possible people to die or get wounded in an explosion. You want your engineer and you want your medic.
Yeah.
So now I put all that work onto regular soldiers. And these guys are so good and so well trained that they were able to jump in and do the right stuff and put a tourniquet on my left leg. And then we got into a G-Wagon, tossed myself in there, and then drove off to the base as the ambulance came out to pick up the other guys. And it was like within 15 minutes, the ambulance was there and picking up Jeff and Will, and I was already back at the base getting minor surge to cut the bleeding and stuff. So.
And you were fully conscious during all of that?
Most of it, yeah. I faded in and out a couple times, but I remember every single second of it. Yeah, it's pretty traumatic. It felt like a chainsaw cutting through your leg. So I can still feel it. And, yeah, it's pretty grim.
So yeah, with that injury, and so they took you to the base hospital, and you had 30 or more surgeries done on you, and
well, it gets even worse. So I'm blown up. They take me back to the Kandahar provincial reconstruction team in the city of Kandahar. So we're not even at the airbase yet. So they're setting up the cots, and one of the medics and I, we always dashed heads and stuff, and he's yelling, "Where's Franklin? Franklin's never here for any of this kind of stuff." And all of a sudden they plunk my ass down and I'm all bleeding and screwed up, and he's like, "Oh, I feel so bad." But what happened was, by moving me so quickly as before the other ambulance arrived, and I was so heavily damaged that medics and doctors could focus in on me. And so the other section medics all worked on me. Some soldiers that had medical interests and skills would also work on our patients. So I get plunked down, and I got a doctor, I got a physician assistant, I got a sergeant, and I think 3 other medics all working on me. So the IVs go in, the tourniquets are put on even tighter, painkillers are administered, the burns are starting to get calmed down. And so that takes about 10 minutes. And by that time, I'm stable. The other two guys arrive, and Will, with his broken stuff, that was a little easier to deal with. He's unconscious, so just did airway and patch him up.
Yeah.
But Jeff actually had a brain injury so severe that his brain was actually exposed.
Jeez.
And he had fallen into one of the Afghan sewers. And so then they were working on him. So he, in the end, they said he probably died like 3-4 times between Afghanistan and Canada. And just because of his injuries were so severe, and no one thought he would ever make it. And he's alive today. He's got 2 kids and just a happy dude. So it's just shocking. And it really shows how that stuff that we taught about that initial help was so important and what saved lives. And I think in all the people that were wounded in Afghanistan in this entire war, and you can include Iraq too, there's 2 people that died after getting medical treatment. That's it, which is just a shocking number. It used to be like 20% might survive, but now we're dealing in 0.001% don't survive. And that's the level of where we were as teaching tactical medicine itself to where we are today, which is, this steep curve of saving literally everyone. It's insane.
Yeah, I recall a statistic from back in high school when we were talking about the Korean War, and when aeromedical evacuations with helicopter, like I guess primitive helicopters were a thing. Like something around like 60% of people who were evacuated to a base hospital would make it, compared to World War II or something like that.
I mean, it's crazy. And I think it was 20% in World War I after injury would make it. And here we are now dealing 0.001% might die. The numbers are insane. And the ability to put everything so far forward. So even in this provincial reconstruction site, we wouldn't get transported by any ground elements. We got a helicopter out of there.
Yeah.
We went to Kandahar airfield, and then they worked on us again.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, Amy, came by, and she's like, I heard you blew up. And I'm laying there apparently on this bed. And I'm like, yeah, it sucks. She goes, are you okay? I said, yeah, but I lost a leg. I lifted up the blanket, and she's like, oh my God. It was hilarious. So yeah, no, apparently I was making jokes and stuff the whole time I was laying on the gurney. So yeah, typical Paul.
So you lost one leg during the actual accident.
Yeah.
Your other.
So the left leg was torn off. The right leg was destroyed. And then we ended up doing 2 surgeries on my left, and then we went to Landstuhl, Germany. Stayed there for 8 days. Did a couple surgeries, and then some more in Edmonton at the University of Alberta. And the total was 36 surgeries in just over a month. And one of the things that we had learned from the Americans was that the more surgeries you do initially, the better the outcomes long term. If you stretch the surgeries and the repair time over a longer period of time, the greater chance that someone's going to have a complication and die. So the best thing is to get these surgeries done as quick as possible, and then get that person on the recovery road. And I remember the day I knew I was dying, because I was down to 130 pounds in the hospital. I'd done like 34 surgeries or something like that. And my son came in, and he had a juicer, a booster juice. And so I tasted it, and it tasted gross. It tasted disgusting. And what that meant, because I'd never had one that tasted bad, was that my body was already rejecting things like sugars and fluids and food, and it was poisoning me in a sense, because I was dying. And then I was supposed to have surgery that day, and the plastic surgeon said, well, we want to skin graft both hands. And I said, no, you're not doing that. And I had burns on my forehead, burns on my hands, a couple of holes in my neck and that kind of stuff. And he says, well, if you don't do that, you're going to completely lose your ability to use your hands and feeling as well. And I said, no. And I'll tell you the side story of that one, because it's kind of interesting. Yeah. And so that night I talked to my doctor at the time, and I said, if you see anything in my right leg, just cut it off, get rid of it. And he said, but if we do, it may be above your knee. And if it's above your knee, you'll never walk again. And I said, yeah, but we got to make the right decision. And I can honestly remember thinking of what's his name? The guy who went around the world in the wheelchair, Rick Hansen.
Rick Hansen, yeah.
I remember, yeah, and I consciously remember thinking that, Rick Hansen went around the world in a wheelchair. It doesn't really matter if I walk, I just want to live. And so I put the two balance in, and it was super easy to do. But the skin graft thing was funny because the plastic surgeon was so offended that I wouldn't get the skin grafts that they called in a mental health expert to talk to me and convince me to do it. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. This is wrong. And what happened was I had read I think it was in Kabul, a medical thing, and because I was a nerd, and so I would read these reports, and one was from the Churchill Trust, and in it, the guy said you should dry the skin wounds or skin burns instead of keeping them moist, because the current thinking was that you put a moist bandage on a burn.
Yeah.
The problem though is skin layers build up over time, and then parts that don't have the skin layers tend to just rot. And so the idea behind this paper was that you take a drying agent, which in this case was ivory soap. And so I would hit the morphine button, and then I would rub ivory soap on the back of my hand into the wound. And so the painkiller is doing its job, but this it was so deadly. But what I was doing was I was moving the skin cells around in my hand.
Yeah.
And so that ended up actually saving the back of my hands and the ability to move my stuff. And yeah, it's quite neat how in the end it all turned out. And instead of doing what you're supposed to do, keep a burn moist and all the rest of it, was to go this other route.
So
and
you did that by yourself?
Yep.
Wow. You have great skin for, even as a, like
this is a 3rd degree burn.
Wow.
And parts to it that actually went down to the tendons. And so I'll try and find some old pictures of the burns, but in theory, I shouldn't be able to move my hands. I shouldn't have any feelings. There is some stiffness, but overall, it's fine. Even the rings and stuff, I'm not sure if you can see the pictures, but they actually burned into the skin at the time. So yeah, it's part of the deal. And then I had a piece of shrapnel on my neck. That there's still parts that come out every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I'll scratch it or it gets inflamed, and then you'll get like a little tiny piece of what looks like plastic.
Mm-hmm.
The problem though is, being a medic, I also know that may not be plastic. That may actually be bone from the dead guys, which not my bone, which is even more disturbing. So I've got like potentially someone else's bones floating around in my neck.
Jeez. Yeah. So after losing your, both of your legs and going through all that recovery, knowing that you'll probably never be, like a medic again, like doing what you were, you obviously really enjoyed doing for the past 10 years of your life. What was the transition like to?
Again, I was quite lucky. General Hillier was in charge at times. He protected a lot of us wounded and made sure that the administration didn't kick us out, because a lot of them wanted us out. If you're 100% disabled, you're out of the military, you're done forever. We thought we all had a place within the military doing teaching, instruction, that kind of thing. And that's where I wanted to go. And I tried it with one field ambulance, and it didn't quite work out. There's conflict with some of the leadership about what I was teaching and how I was teaching it and that kind of stuff. And I mean, I go in and teach a class on tourniquets and take my leg off, and I say, it's not so bad. And then, one or two guys would pass out. Well, I don't want to do this. I'm like, look, we're going to Afghanistan tomorrow. You gotta learn this shit now, or you die. And they're like, oh, I don't want to go. One of the funniest moments is I was actually in Vancouver at Jericho, and there's a big sort of militia thing, and so I did a little speech, and about 150 of the people were there were getting ready for various deployments around the world. About 90% were all going to Afghanistan. And I counted out in the room, and I said, there's about 100, 120 people here. One of you will die. 3 of you will lose limbs and burn your eyes and maybe potentially have a spinal cord injury. Look around. Are you guys ready for this? And there's like silence. And I said, you guys got to start thinking beyond just simple training. This is your potential to die. And I'm not talking a 1 in a million shot. I'm talking there's one of you in this room out of 100 will die, guaranteed. That's the numbers say. 3 or 4 of you are going to have severe injuries that are going to cause you emotional or cause you physical stress. Yeah. And then on top of it, I tossed the PTSD thing. I said 20% of you are going to get PTSD so bad that you're going to have to leave your own current jobs. You'll probably have to leave your wives, maybe even your kids. And they're like, oh, that's the responsibility of these kind of tours. And then people started thinking, okay, this is different. And so that's the stuff I love teaching, and that's where I went for many, many years. So I blew up at 6 years into my military career, 7 or whatever it was. And then I managed to make it to 11 and a half years. And it's sometimes things are so petty. In Canada, it's hard to get a medal. You do your tour, you do sacrifices like Purple Heart. So I have 4 medals, very proud of what each represent. Mm-hmm. But it's not like the rack you get in the States. Well, one of the things was at 12 years, you get your Canadian Forces decoration. So I was released at 11 and a half years. I'm like, how petty do people have to be to just cut it off right there, this arbitrary thing? I mean, Jesse La Rochelle, everybody talks about him as being the first modern Canadian Victoria Cross winner. Yeah. And the guy was attacked in a position. His 2 weapons, his machine gun and his personal weapon, were injured in explosions and RPG stuff, and he's wounded. Mm-hmm. And he has all these Taliban running straight towards him, and he's got the camp behind him. Basically, he's the only wall of defense. He ends up using 15 M72 tank rounds, or law, they're called. And he just picks him up, starts shooting, even though he's wounded and all the rest of it. And they only gave him the Star of Valor, which is nice. And it's the second highest level of the Canadian bravery system for Valor. But this is a guy that should be a Victoria Cross winner. And they ended up not treating him that well either. And so he eventually left the military, and I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but there's a large call within the veteran community to solve the problems of the past by fixing our mistakes, like not giving certain people the right medal decorations that they deserve. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not comparing anything I did to what Jesse has done, but it's that kind of mindset that trickles down to the point where you end up with a bunch of medics saying, oh, well, we can't make him. He's only been in, or what at the time I had been 4.5 years as a wounded medic. And so all they had to do was just 6 months. Yeah, even on paperwork, you could just do it or have me report in, but no, they're like, you're done. Yeah. And so I was always bitter about that. Then I went civilian in 2009, and I thought, okay, I'll teach, as a paramedic in schools and other things. Well, it turns out that the Alberta Paramedic Association says I can't teach unless I'm qualified, and you can't be qualified if you're considered unfit. And because I can't lift a stretcher, I'm considered unfit. Right. Which is insane because I'm not unfit, but whatever. So I ended up being unable to teach. So I had to sort of carve out a career afterwards by working with a bunch of charities and doing that kind of thing. And then guest speaking and coming in and just talking to people about my story. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to catch my thought. No, it's okay. A lot there. Lot to unpack. What I find really surprising about how you talk about all of this, even right after your injury, you were you were making jokes about your leg coming off as your coworkers walking in on you just completely injured, and you still you have such a positive attitude. Even there's good days and bad days too, but I always try and make it so there's more good days than bad days. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it is the kind of method that's saved my life over the years for sure. Yeah. So I mean, given the like me being in university, and we see there's, especially during all these lockdown times, people really have a hard time seeing the future and kind of staying motivated and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, especially right now with all the
with the second wave and third wave now.
Third wave, yeah.
Everybody, like me, like I'm talking to my friends and people from work, like it's like people really have a hard time kind of just, staying positive. So, and you have, people, I mean, like the way I think of it, a lot of the problems that, we have as, kids who go to a really good university, and we have, I have way more than what my parents ever had when they were growing up really in, rural China. And having something so like traumatic happen to you, but you're always able to motivate yourself to kind of reinvent your career, with all the obstacles you've been in, and the institutional barriers or whatever.
Yeah.
How are you able to, I guess, what kind of advice would you have for young people, like myself, or even people who are struggling with that, given all these current existential
threats
kind of just bogging them down?
Yeah. The key to success is training, and it sounds cheesy and it sounds old school, but the reality is, if you're prepared for these kinds of changes, then they don't come as a shock to you. So your experience having a great school and great friends and stuff is far different than, say, someone in Soweto or someone in India or rural China. And we're so lucky to have been here. And I think one of the things we forget is how far we've come. The more we look back, the better it gets to the future, because we can apply what we've learned from the past to where we are today. So your parents went through hell, and managed to get you to this position where they never thought would ever be possible, right? I mean, it just doesn't happen in rural China to come out west and then have a great success.
Well, very few, but it's more common nowadays. But
definitely. Oh no, yeah, and that's the difference, though, is that now we have all these great students being able to take it to the next level, and we have almost a global population of these experts. And the world I see, there's so much pessimism, but the world I see is going to be a different place and far better than what we were given by the boomers, if you will. Now, I was Gen X, and so we tended to just kind of meh through life.
Yeah.
Oh, there's the genocide. Meh, we'll do our best. We'll get through it. I just don't see that happening with the millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z. It just doesn't seem to be on their radar that someone would go in and say, okay, we're going to go kill a bunch of civilians, and them not do anything.
Yeah. I
really think that we're in a place where the youth are going to be more engaged. We're at a cusp where I think we're really going to see, especially once this pandemic ends, 2023, the world is going to be a far different place. The boomers have already proven that they don't care about kids because they don't put you on the vaccine list. They don't care about old people because they don't want to wear masks, and then it interferes their right to go shopping at Walmart or something insane. The only ones that are fighting that group, it's not Gen X. We're just kind of done with it. We're used to their cancel culture crap. When I was a kid, they tried to cancel rap, Dungeons and Dragons, any kind of music. With Twisted Sister was evil, and Mrs. Al Gore was the one that was going to save the day from pornography and listening from Twisted Sister. That's how we grew up. And so the end result was we created things like Nirvana and this anti-cultural group, right? Rage Against the Machine. Now, in a sense, we've kind of skipped our generation to say, we're going to take care of this. We'll take care of the world. We're like, no, we don't want any part of it. It's all on you kids. And I think once younger people realize that the entire weight of the world is on them, they will go, okay, I don't need to be bored because I can solve everything. You got a little tiny Swedish girl with autism who suddenly becomes a Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah.
I think that's just shows where we are as a society and how far it's going to go. Unfortunately, I also see that the Americans are probably going to have a very hot, burning summer with the race relations and police relations they have. I just hope it doesn't trickle over to Canada, and that we can kind of set ourselves up on the next level, like New Zealand or Australia or even the UK and France.
Yeah.
So that's a short answer as to motivation for kids. Like, instead of just saying, you could do it, what? No, here it is. The entire world is on your plate.
Yeah.
deal with it.
To
And
respond.
I think that's an interesting way, because we've never done that as a society. The old people have always said, okay, we've got to protect ourselves, do this, do that. No, just here, it's all yours. Go for it.
And do you kind of see that in your personal life where, like you've been given like this chapter of being, running around with PPCLI, doing all the, grunt stuff, being in the field, but now you are, you're at a different place because of the circumstances, and it is what it is, and you just tried to make the best out of it.
Exactly. And we knew it was right to teach them at the time tactical first aid, and we knew that the medical group didn't want us to do it, so we just ended up teaching it anyways. We got in trouble. We got pulled before the man and told not to do it again, and the next day we'd go back and teach them, because more education is never a bad thing. And it was hard for them to understand it, especially the old guard, if you would. They'd be like, why are you teaching these people these things? It's like, it's going to save their lives, but more importantly, it's going to save your life, and which was proven in my case. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I always push on youth of today is the world's your oyster, and it's all on your plate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going back to the Legion magazine article, I found this part really interesting. Was that and I'll read this little part here. Let me
Yeah, no worries.
find it real quick. Oops. Okay. So at the beginning of the article, and I quote from Legion magazine, the article, "You Can't Regret Life." Master Corporal Paul Franklin kept pictures on the wall of his cubicle in Land Force Western Area Headquarters at CFE Edmonton. Those were the photos of Taliban fighters who took his legs. And going down a little bit into the article, I still quote, "There was the Taliban senior military commander, Mullah Dadullah, along with a local cell commander and his deputy. They had orchestrated what Franklin is convinced was a direct hit using a suicide driver and 56 kilos of high explosives." And later on the article, and I'll paraphrase from here, was, one day, I think, somebody came in and told you that, we got him, and you were able to kind of like cross off all these names. And then what I found really interesting was that it just didn't really bring you the relief that you thought it might have had with.
Yeah, I thought there was a vengeance side to me, and there really wasn't. It was interesting that they had got all the bad guys.
Yeah.
But man, it didn't really mean that much, like I remember I was down in San Diego, and a friend of mine who was working with some SEALs, he came over by, and he told me that they got some of the bigwigs, and I should raise a glass, and I did, and I thought, he means nothing to me. He's dead. Who cares? He's a useless piece of trash. Yeah. I'm glad he's dead, because that means no more innocents will die. But I don't need to celebrate it. And so after I did some X's and a couple dates on it, I took the piece of paper down with their faces, and it made me realize really quickly that I didn't need to be that angry, vengeful guy, because that doesn't solve anything.
Yeah, that was like really interesting to me, because given the current climate, which is, I don't know, it's just kind of crazy reading the news every day, where people are very always angry at each other. And me, as someone who who's quite religious in my private life, the concept of forgiveness, that's something I talk about with people in my religious community and our friends a lot. And the fact that you came to terms with that, this person who did this horrible thing to you kind of took away what you love doing for your calling for life. And once you could say he got what he deserved. Well, he obviously did, because he was he was working with the Taliban, and they were not very good people. But you didn't take that very personally.
There's no need. I mean, their target was our diplomat. Potentially, the other target was our superintendent of the RCMP, who was in the vehicle behind me. Mm-hmm. So the bad guys could have been targeting either one, but for sure they were targeting those two. And the way they hit us, they knew our tactics. They knew where the diplomats and the VIPs sat. They knew how fast we would go. They knew a lot. And one of the things you have to realize in war is that sometimes the bad guys win.
Yeah.
And how you accept defeats be it a basketball game or be it war, is just as important as how you accept victory. You don't want to be that guy running around like an idiot, charging, saying, "Hey, I won," and then get blown up. You have to be humble in your victories. And for me, it was the same thing. Sure, he took my ability to walk and he took my ability to run and climb mountains and all the rest of it, but I'm alive. And he didn't get that chance. And in a way, in a large way, terrorism is a failed concept. It always has been, and in many ways, it always will be. Terrorism rarely leads to a peaceful solution. And if it does, it takes great leadership to get to that level. So you'd have to look at the IRA and the Northern Irish government to be able to sit down at the same table with the same guys that tried to kill them and say, okay, we have to have peace. And that I always took inspiration in that. That takes a lot of balls to be that kind of person to say, no, I'm gonna do my best and not hate you and make the world a slightly better place. But yeah, I mean, all terrorism does is brings people together instead of separating them. The idea of terrorism is to separate them and create a vacuum where these guys can come in and run their little jihad or their little caliphate. It doesn't happen. Afghanistan is more open now, and it's instead of being the world's worst country, it's now maybe in the top 10 of the world's worst countries. But that's exponential growth. Each time they went from the world's worst to the second worst to the third worst, that was so much better. There's more girls in school than there ever has been. There's more people that are taking education. And sure, there's still security concerns, but the Taliban are running the country. There's no Taliban president. There's no Taliban army chief or any of that other garbage. It's they achieved something. And that's one of the things where I'm so proud of, because you really see how these guys took a place of being a victim and made it to being a success. And that's where I get inspiration for it. So in many ways, I get inspiration from the Afghans of how to deal with my own injury and try and be successful after injury.
Yeah, that's a great point there. I think, I don't know if you are familiar with the talk show host Conan O'Brien. When he, when he got kicked off his show on CBS, one of the things he said that I always stuck with me was, he hated cynicism, and if you wanted to be anything in this world, at least don't be a cynic. And
I always say be self-deprecating. Because the most successful people in the world are always self-deprecating people. Yeah. So I'm not a big George Bush fan. I think he's kind of wishy-washy, and he put some really bad people in charge of some pretty important organizations that led to the Iraq War and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's come out as one of the most self-deprecating leaders after, and he's become charming, which is bizarre. I would never think of George W. Bush as a charming guy who makes cute artwork. That was something that was so off the radar. And here we are, 2020, he's making this cool little artwork, and he's like one of the cool leaders. And you're like, what the hell happened? So imagine if, imagine if he didn't put those people in charge back in his organization, those Reaganites, those guys. If he actually put in some other people, what the world would have been, it would have been interesting, That being said, the Trumpism has shown that you're never guaranteed of a good result. There's always a result, and it never might not be the best thing in the world. It might just be the world's worst result.
Yeah. Going back to the whole, I guess, self-forgiveness piece. Again, with, the reason I wanted to talk to you was, there's so much that you've gone through. There's so many lessons that, everybody could learn with, given the current climate of our society. What kind of recommendations do you have for people, nowadays, with everyone being so divided, that we could, come and, look at each other and, not be so up in arms and so gatekeepy and, I have to cancel you, you have to cancel me, that kind of.
Yeah, and I'm not a big one on the cancel culture because, like I said, in the 80s, we had that. And those guys end up looking like idiots because Ice Cube is making commercials for insurance, for God's sake. I mean, 1990s Ice Cube would beat the crap out of 2020 Ice Cube.
You probably would. Yeah, he was in the boxing match performing last night. I was watching with my friends.
Like, they're just so funny. Like, that's how it's changed. So, I mean, we can get really angry. In his case, he was really angry in the 90s, and he's calmed down and realized where he needs to be in 2020, and
Yeah.
that we can still have the same message, still the same stuff, but not be that angry young man who was ineffective in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So when we hear about Gina Carano being kicked off Mandalorian for being basically a horrible person, so she was sending some horrible stuff to Pedro, who is the Mandalorian, and
Okay.
he is, I think it's his sister is trans, and of course the side story that no one really ever talked about was that Gina was harassing his sister or brother or whatever that is, and that's one of the reasons she got kicked off. It's not that she was canceled. I kind of don't like the term canceled, because we have people saying it's a cancel culture, and yet they're the ones who want to cancel everything. They're saying boycott baseball because of the Georgia laws. They say we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't listen to Facebook, we can't listen to YouTube, we need to have government step in. And I think what people really need to do is focus their anger on anyone that wants to stifle free speech or stifle free abilities. I think that's why I put it all onto the youth, because we've experienced it. It's not a pleasant thing, but it's nowhere near as what it was in the past. And so now let's have the youth take over and run the show, because I can guarantee it's going to be far better than the way it was done in the past.
Yeah. And so you briefly touched upon this earlier about the charity work you've been doing.
Yep.
It was the Franklin Foundation, which is, to help other amputees. What other projects have you been, or like your primary place of work nowadays?
Well, I focused on that. So I started off with the Northern Alberta Amputee Program, and then it kind of morphed into the Franklin Foundation. And then from that, it went to the Amputee Coalition of Canada, which is a national bilingual organization. And I've stepped back from that, and I'm working with the Wounded Warriors and Soldier On through the Canadian military as well, and also Heroes Hockey Challenge with the PP Sly Association and a couple other organizations, just trying to raise money and awareness for all these causes. And there's another one that I'm currently working with, is to have in United States, Canada, and the UK, have a website where anyone can go to get all their mental health listings of everything that they need to do. So say you're in Birmingham, England, all of a sudden you enter that, and there's the list of all the social services, mental health, military help, veterans, legions, whatever, listed out. And then, but do that across, like I said, Canada, the United States, and England. And there's some guys in England that have done great jobs. There's some work being done in Canada, and that's one of those things that we're going to try and bring in, because there's so many organizations. And this is one of the things I realized with charity, is that everybody is trying to do very similar things, but they don't talk to each other. And it kind of goes with that hate and anger thing. They're all jealous of money and power and such. And what they need to do is sit together in a room and say, okay, who does this? Who does mental health first aid? Who does family mental health first aid? Who does children's bereavement funding? And just go around the table and do that. We're not there yet, but that's where I'd like to see, and that's where I'm going to put my efforts to the next level, is to make things like that happen. And it starts by doing it local in a province or a region, and then going national, and then eventually international. So the goal right now, so that's the fun part, is that we've got this international concept of where we want to be, and we still haven't quite finished the local parts yet, because we haven't got those guys to sit at the table without yelling at each other. So but that will come.
I just recalled this from earlier. You've also met a lot of interesting people. I think I found this picture of you with former First Lady Michelle Obama, where you.
Oh yeah,
you were.
I love that picture. That's a cool one.
Do you want to know? Is there an interesting story behind that, or something similar?
Michael Burns, he ran the Invictus Foundation,
Yeah.
in Toronto. And so I hooked up with him, and we promoting Invictus and the concepts behind it. So I get to meet Prince Harry and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So Michelle Obama came to Edmonton, and Michael Burns was running that show. And so they announced my name on the thing, and special guest Paul. And so they had a meet and greet afterwards. And executives were paying like $1,000 a picture and stuff just to be with Michelle. So he got me in there. I got 2 pictures with her, which is kind of cool. And I leaned over and I put my arm up. I put my arm on her butt. So the picture of me and Michelle Obama, I have my arm on her butt. And then the next picture is both of us laughing at it. And I explained a bit of my story as a former soldier. And of course, they're big, passionate believers in what we've done. And so, yeah, there you go. I've touched Michelle Obama's butt.
Yeah, it's a lot of great stories for the grandkids.
But yeah, I met Prince Harry, and I had my medals on, and 2 of the medals are backwards so that you can see the artwork. So my sacrifice medal, which has the Vimy Ridge symbol or sculpture of Mother Canada, is on it, and then the obverse is the Queen, and then the other one is the Southwest Asia Service Medal for my first tour in Kabul. And it's got this Hydra, and the idea is the Canadian is stabbing the Hydra in the heart, not chopping off its heads, because terrorism is a multi-headed creature, and you have to kill the body. You don't just kill the heads.
Yeah.
There's a lot packed into a medal. I mean, that's like a whole Greek history. And, David Fry would be or Stephen Fry would just be loving that kind of stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so I had 2 of them backwards, and Harry goes, "So what are those?" Because he didn't recognize the obverse of them. And I said, it's just your grandmother. I mean, we already have her on one of them, so she doesn't need to see on both. Now, unpacking that, knowing what we know now, that may not have been the best thing.
How did the Prince of Wales react to that?
He laughed, and we got a great picture of just him and I. And so again, there's 2 pictures of us, and one of them pointing at the medals, and then he turns the camera and he's laughing. So yeah, it was funny. But I like the idea of the reversing of the medals, because of course, in Canada, the medals are made at the Canadian Mint and are super high quality. Yeah. And so there's silver and bronze, and some of them have zinc in them. And they're quite interesting medals. Plus, the artwork is as nice as any coin or what have you. So it's nice to be proud of the medals and show the other sides to it, and show the artwork and the concepts behind it. Because normally people would go, "Oh, that's your Southwest Asia Service Medal." Yeah. And since if they don't see the Hydra, the story lacks a little oomph. But when you tell them that, no, the mission was based on killing terrorists and destroying the Hydra of terrorism and helping it, so it makes it better. And the reason it's picked as Greek is because Alexander the Great came there in the Macedonian days and helped bring Greek culture to Afghanistan. And then most of the missions that were in the Middle East were all named after Greek gods. Yeah. So Operation Athena, Archer, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of neat history that they really tie into what we've done, and it makes for just a neat little story or anecdote based on just that one thing. So if you think about it, someone made a medal that no one ever thought would ever turn around, and here I am 10 years later showing Prince Harry that you don't need to see your grandmother. Here's a cool medal.
Yeah. That's actually a great homage. I didn't realize how that was connected, because, well, of course, Kandahar is actually named after Alexander. It's
and we actually saw the plaque. A couple of guys got out of the vehicle. We guarded it, but a couple of guys went up to the hill and carved in the side of a mountain, which used to be an old Greek fortress. Yeah, is Alexander the Great was here, like written in old Greek script. It's there. Some general wrote that and posted that 30 BC or whatever it was.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah. And again, it just goes back to, maybe earlier this year, we had a few Afghan veterans. We had a little event. We also had an Afghan interpreter. And we were just talking about, their experiences from different countries and what it was like. And, I think people do kind of, the main thing that came out of that was, people in my age group, we see the Middle East and that kind of part of the world in such a specific way, because by the time we were old enough to understand it, it was kind of the aftermath of all the wars and stuff like that. And, with me kind of, studying history at the University of Toronto, you kind of have to remind yourself, and this is a big point that our professors have been making, is that it hasn't always been this way. It's the history.
But it's always been this way for you guys.
Yeah,
That's where
exactly.
a lot of professors do make the mistake in saying that, oh, it wasn't always like this in the 90s or in 98 when I joined. It was peacekeeping and saving people from genocide.
Yeah.
That's where I thought my career would go. I had no clue that Islamic extremists would cause me to lose my leg.
Yeah.
And deaths of my friends. Right, not even on the radar. You guys are war babies, much like my father was, who was, born in 38 or whatever, so that he grew up during World War II. You've grown up in effectively a third world war of us trying to fight not just Islamic extremism, but all extremism. That's the 2000s. That's your youth. And yet your youth is marked by a war that killed and maimed millions across the world. Now, you guys have the education and the place, and you're being put into positions to stop that from ever happening again.
Yeah.
So I don't want to diminish that. You guys will say, hey, that was something that happened, and it's not always been that way.
Yeah.
But you need to take your experience as war babies to the next level and make it so that it doesn't happen again. And that's, and I think where the youth of today, especially in organizations and in programs like yours, has to look at the past to see how they managed to do better after World War II. Unfortunately, that directly led to the Korean War and then the Vietnam War. So those are the mistakes of the past that if we can somehow correct. You see what Putin is doing in Ukraine, or you see what the Chinese are doing in Taiwan, or trying to do in Taiwan. That'll be your battle. We'll be there to support you, but it's all in your hands, which is scary as hell too.
Yeah, I mean, to the big reason that this journal that me and my friends started was, for most of I've lived in, so for context, I lived in China for the first 10 years of my life. 9 years of my life, and and it's not really brought up as much as I think it should. Maybe it's because not as many people serve in the military nowadays, and the animus towards the war in Afghanistan is quite controversial in a lot of people's minds. So that and the fact that you don't really know a lot of people personally, like back in World War II, like 10% of our country, which was like 10 million, like 1 million people out of 10 million served in World War II. And growing up in China, like everybody knew someone that, was part of the Japanese war or gone through something with the communist regime. But here you don't really know a lot of people personally. You don't really hear about it as much, except you see it on maybe like a Hollywood movie where everything's kind of, amped up. So it's almost like an entire different world that we don't.
Oh, it is.
It kind of exists to me, it exists in like a bygone era. And I don't know if you feel the same way, that Canadians maybe by and large kind of just don't really recognize or are super conscious that our country was far away doing this thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Only 151 people died in the Afghan war, and yet 26,000 died under COVID. I think in Vimy Ridge, something like 20,000 Canadians died in a single day.
Yeah.
When you start doing numbers, it becomes overwhelming and it loses a bit of the context, I think. We tend to focus on the numbers instead of the people. The Afghan war, as much as we had Canadian society behind us, Canadian society provided zero sacrifice to what we did. There was no gas rationing, there was no clothing rations, there was no lockdowns, none of that stuff. Yeah. And we've proven now with all these lockdowns and stuff that people are so selfish that they're willing to risk others' lives for their own benefit, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's the sad part, is we're in a war footing, but no one's willing to make any sacrifice. If you think about it, this virus is a 2-week lifespan. New Zealand, Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, Atlantic Canada, for God's sake, have all proven how to successfully fight a virus and bring your community together and protect your elderly and protect the most vulnerable. And so some people are like, oh, it's easy because there are islands and they can shut off things. Well, Atlantic Canada is not an island. It's right beside Maine and largest infection sites in the world in New York City and all the rest of it. And yet here we are out west. Well, specifically Alberta. The lockdowns don't work, and in Ontario, you guys are screwed.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I mean, they open the playgrounds one day, close them, open sweat gyms the next day, and then say you can't go golfing outside. There's no rules that make any sense, and that's why I think people are so angry and frustrated. And I kind of look at it as the old way of propaganda. Back in the day, we would have propaganda telling us what to do, and people would listen and do that stuff. Nowadays, we don't have that because the government's unwilling to tell us what to do. They're willing to suggest certain things, but they don't give out orders, or they don't give out knowledge to these people. I mean, apparently in Alberta, they have 6,000. They can do 6,000 vaccines a day, and they did something like 200 yesterday on Friday. And this all ends when people get vaccinated. And I know a lot of youth all want to get vaccinated so they can get back to life and go to parties and go to shows and do things. And they're being denied these vaccines by so-called people that care for you. And it's interesting if you think of it as a war footing, that we're not there yet. And I thought we would do better as a society with being modern and being able to do what war footing. And no, we aren't.
Yeah. Well, maybe a negative note to end on compared to the rest of the conversation. So I guess to kind of wrap it up, where can people find you if they want to, help with your foundation, learn more about your story, all sorts of that stuff?
Well, I'm on social media. I've done Facebook for years, and it's should have been my main piece, telling the story and trying to fight to get fights and stuff. And so people can just find me as Paul Franklin on there. I'm going to probably do more social media handles as we come towards more in different places this summer with some of the charity stuff that I'm working on.
Yeah.
But the Amputee Coalition of Canada is on site, and they accept donations for peer support and research into amputee care. And of course, Soldier On is through the Canadian military. Mm-hmm. And you'll see a lot of their work this summer in Tokyo for the Paralympics, as we start to bring more and more wounded soldiers into the Paralympian world and taking it to the next level. I won't do Paralympics because I'm lazy. Through that, because that's actual work. I don't want to do actual work. No. Training and stuff.
I understand.
I'll support them. Yay.
Anything really.
Yeah, no, it's just a lot of fun, and these guys are just true athletes. Like, some of the stuff they're doing is just amazing.
Yeah.
And so that people can follow me on there, and hopefully I'll be in the news and stuff, teaching or talking about Invictus Games coming up in 2022 now, and in Amsterdam, and so hopefully we'll be telling those stories.
Perfect. Well, yeah. So that concludes our interview. As always, Commandant Journal. You can find us. Leave links on. Once it's posted, I'll leave all the links for all the relevant stuff. So submissions, articles, all that in the bottom. Thank you, Mr. Franklin, for joining us, and have a great evening.
Yeah, it's
afternoon.
Still snowing, believe it or not.
Snowing, yes.
Yeah. Oh no, I lost you.